Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. We talk all things NBA and NFL. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and hit that subscribe button down below because it really helps out our channel a lot. Also, leave a comment down below and let us know who's your pick to win the NFC West. Today, we will be doing our first NFL divisional breakdown of 2021, and we are starting off with the NFC West. How's it going, guys?
I'm good, Drew. I'm really excited to get into the previews this year. Starting off with probably the best division in the league this year. I think that might be something we can all agree on. But a lot of storylines going into this season. I'm excited to dive into it with you both.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best divisions in the NFL going into this year. I really think it's going to be a bloodbath this year as well. There's not really, in my opinion, not a clear bet. Like any one of these teams could probably win the division. I mean, obviously, I have a favorite team in this division, but really realistically, I think literally any of these teams could end up coming out on top in this division.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys started off very well over there. I don't really have too much to add, so let's jump right into the first team here, which is the Los Angeles Rams. When you look at their additions and their subtractions, they didn't add a whole lot, but it feels like they added a lot because they obviously got our former quarterback here in Detroit, Matthew Stafford. He's pictured right there with Sean McVay to hopefully quarterback. At least they're hoping that he quarterbacks this team better than Jared Goff did the last few seasons. They also added, most notably, Deshaun Jackson, who don't know how much left he has left in the tank, but we'll have to wait and see. And then Tutu Atwell there in the second round because they didn't have first-round picks, so they gave them all away for Jalen Ramsey, and then obviously Stafford as well. And then subtractions, as I already mentioned, Jared Goff got traded to the Lions. Michael Brockers also got traded to the Lions. You got John Johnson and Troy Hill both going to the Browns. Samson Ebukam, here we go again, like last season with these crazy names. With the Niners, Gerald Everett with the Seahawks, and then Austin Blythe went to the Chiefs. So some notable subtractions. They didn't lose a whole ton. They're still a really good team. And then unfortunately yesterday, too, it was announced that Cam Akers, who was really good last year down the stretch in his rookie season, unfortunately tore his Achilles, is out for the year. I don't know if it was ever announced what he was doing. I think it was just like a personal workout, basically, and then he just tore it, which really sucks. But this team, in my opinion, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. I think they're still a solid team. And I think Stafford, he might not be as big of an upgrade as everyone thinks he is, but I still think he is definitely an upgrade over Jared Goff. And they were pretty good last year, as the record shows. They were 10-6. They beat the Seahawks in the wild card round and put up a decent fight against the Packers in the divisional round in Lambeau as well. So, I think this is going to be one of the best teams in the league. But who wants to start us off here with your analysis of this team?
I'll go first. The Rams obviously were solid last season with their. Obviously, is evidenced by their 10-6 record. They're a very solid team last year. I think the one thing that this team did not have last season, despite having a very good roster, was obviously a competent quarterback. Because Jared Goff, let's face it, the guy sucks. Like, let's be honest. I know, he's a lion now. The guy's absolutely trash. Let's be honest. He couldn't run this offense. He wasn't good enough to get it done. He had two of the better receivers in this league, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, to throw the ball to, a solid offensive line, a great defense. And, I mean, despite that Super Bowl appearance since then, really hasn't had a lot of success. And a lot of people, criticize Sean McVay for certain things. It's not on McVay. It's on Jared Goff. And because this guy's he just isn't as good as he was advertised. He was a former first overall pick, like Matthew Stafford, but just really didn't live up to the hype. After a couple of really solid seasons to start his career, he really just the rails fell off for him. But, I think just obviously the biggest key to this team now is going to be how they can replace the loss of Cam Akers, because he's a very solid running back. Obviously he's done for the year with the Achilles tear, but hopefully he can bounce back. It's not historically not an injury that any running back has really recovered from, but he's more on the young side for that. So hopefully he can recover from it. But to replace him, they still have Darrell Henderson, so I think he's at least a serviceable backup, and they'll probably sign an Adrian Peterson, Lev Bell. Maybe they'll bring back former Rams great Todd Gurley, who is now currently absolutely terrible at football. But one of these guys will probably be brought in to help out, and maybe they'll figure things out. But I really do agree with Drew. I think this is one of the better teams in the league. Definitely one of the better teams in this division, and they have a good shot. They have a shot at the Super Bowl for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, those are good points, Chris. We can talk about Matthew Stafford for hours, pretty much, and his impact. And obviously, since Cam Akers' injury, that'll be a huge storyline as well. But what I don't think people are talking about enough is those key losses on defense, because you see Brockers, John Johnson, Samson Ebukam, those were all cornerstone pieces of that defense. And obviously, when you have a guy like Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, Jalen Ramsey, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I'm interested to see how that defense will bounce back. And I even brought it up, a month ago or 2 months ago when we were doing our draft recap episode, how the Rams didn't address those losses on defense and even on the offensive line too. So I'm interested in seeing how that they bounce back from that. I think if there's any, that's their major flaw going into this season. Um, while Stafford is a huge upgrade from Goff, so it could even itself out, I guess you could say. I do think they might be more susceptible on defense than they were before, but obviously, like I mentioned, with Aaron Donald, those other guys, it could very well not be the case. So I'm interested seeing how they do in that regard. But overall, I do think this is the best team in the division. Probably a Super Bowl contender, I would say. Quite funny how as soon as Matthew Stafford gets traded to the Rams, he's all of a sudden a top 10, top 6 quarterback in the league over guys like Lamar Jackson, Prescott. But that's neither here nor there. I'm interested in how they all work together this year.
Yeah, I mean, you guys really touched on all the points here with this team. Is they have the potential to be a Super Bowl winner, honestly. But there's a low floor too. I mean, like you said, Roman, they did lose some on defense. They didn't really address that in free agency or the draft at all. And it's very much a make or break year, I think, for Sean McVay. Because for years we've been hearing how he's an offensive genius, which I think he is. But then it was he's offensive genius, but he has a bum at quarterback. Well, now, I mean, say what you will about Stafford. I think the outpour of emotion that the city of Detroit showed for him about how we were crying in the streets and everybody was sad and upset about him leaving was a bit much. I don't think he was that great. He never won a playoff game, but he was still a really solid quarterback for us for a very long time. He's definitely an upgrade over Jared Goff. And he's a quality quarterback. And if McVay can't do it with Stafford, then maybe I think Chris, like you said, he's McVay has been shouldering some of the blame for some of the Rams shortcomings. And if he can't do it with this year with Stafford, then I think it's. And there have been some rumors out there that maybe him and their general manager might be out the door here sooner rather than later, especially with the trade that they did, giving up a lot of their future draft capital to get Stafford here. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the teams to watch, whether or not they win a ton of games or they lose a ton of games all season long. As I said at the top, even with the Akers injury, I tend to go to the side of that they're going to be a really good team. Spoiler alert, I don't think they're going to win the division, but I do think they're going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to be a wild card team pretty easily. They just have it's just if they were in any other division in the league, at least any other division in the NFC, I think they'd easily win that division. It's just they have unfortunately they're in a division where there's 4 teams that all could realistically make the playoffs. So yeah, I'm really excited to watch this team. I don't know. I guess I'll be rooting for Stafford. I'm also kind of over all the just everyone crying about him, and
Yeah.
I'm all in the Jared Goff camp now. He's my quarterback. So, but yeah, all jokes aside, I'm looking forward to watching this team, and I think the defense too. I think they're going to be really good again, like they were last year. I mean, they basically carried them almost to the NFC Championship game, and you don't really see that too often anymore in the offensive NFL. So that's really fun to watch too. I think Aaron Donald too is probably the best NFL player in the league right now. I think for weird reason he's kind of underrated. But yeah, I think Chris, you might have something that you want to add here.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch up on Stafford a little bit more as well because you definitely raised some good points. I think, it's a little bit different with this. I think the defense, I agree, is going to be solid again this year. And it's almost like, the running game was really solid last year at the end of the year with Cam Akers. Now it's going to be more on the shoulders of a better quarterback, Matthew Stafford, and then Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, I think are going to be very involved this year. Going to both have very good seasons. And, I really do like the Matthew Stafford trade for the Rams. It makes a lot of sense. It's the one, quarterback's the most important position in the league. You got to have a good one to win it all. And they didn't have a good one, and now they do. So I really think it's as simple as that. And I also agree with you, Drew, when you say that they are not going to win this division because I have a different winner as well. And I think we do have the same winner, personally.
I was also interject and said Stafford is used to not having a run game, so this should be no problem for him. Like you mentioned, though, it will be on Henderson, maybe a few sleepers that we'll probably talk about later. But overall, I think Stafford can deal with this loss, but it's never a bad thing to have a good running back, as we've seen before.
I will say before we get to our record picks here, and then we move into the next team, another possible Achilles heel, no offense to Cam Akers, for this team is their injuries. I mean, look at last year. I know their offensive line was decimated. Jared Goff got hurt. I think Henderson also got banged up a little bit. Cooper Kupp seems like he's always got a concussion or he's got some sort of injury going on. I think Robert Woods, same thing. And then now they have Matthew Stafford, who he's always banged up, it seems like. And yeah, he plays through the injuries, but he's always hurt. So that could be another interesting kind of wrinkle of this team for sure, that they don't stay healthy, and they're bringing in a quarterback who also doesn't tend to stay healthy, even though he's playing. I know he's had that weird streak where he was playing a bunch of games, but I feel like every season, by the time you get to like week 11 or week 12, Stafford's got a thumb injury or a back injury or a leg injury or all of the above. So that's going to be a little thing to worry about if you're a Rams fan for sure. But we can do our record picks here. I'll start us off since I'm already talking. I have the Rams. Again, this is only because their schedule is really tough. I still think they're going to be a wild card team, even though this record might seem a little bit low when you look at the talent on paper. But I have them going 10-7. I think it's just going to be an absolute dogfight in this division. Like I said, all these teams are going to be within, spoiler alert again, they're going to be within like 3 to 5 games of each other throughout the division. So even though 10-7 might not be the beautiful record that maybe many Rams fans are hoping for, I still think it's solid. It reflects more on not the talent on the team, but on the talent in the division as a whole. And I still have them making the wild card, even though I don't have them as my division winner.
Yeah, with the Rams here, I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I do agree. I think they're going to be a wild card team. I have them at 11-6. I think Stafford's going to instantly make them a better team. But I also see the path where this team could be, 13-4, 14-3 with Stafford, because this team has a lot of talent outside of the quarterback position. They finished 10-6 last season, so 11-6, not really a big upgrade for acquiring Matthew Stafford, but I really think their playoff upside is a lot higher with him as well too. I think they could win a Super Bowl, whereas with Goff, I knew they weren't going to win the Super Bowl last year.
They almost did a couple of years ago.
They did.
Yeah, obviously I'm wearing the Rams jersey, so I got to back them up. I was on the Rams train last year. I'm going to be on it again. They're my division winner, so I had to spoil that so early into the episode. But like you said, Chris, they do have the upside for a 14-3 season. That's probably my ceiling for them. However, they can always fall back a couple of games. I still think they can win the division. There's a scenario where they win the division comfortably, I'd say, but like you mentioned, Drew, it's also going to be really close maybe throughout the second half of the season. So 14-3 is my ceiling for the Rams. However, I wouldn't be surprised if they got a couple more losses on that record, but still my division winner no matter what.
Wait, so what's your record prediction then? Like, I know you said 14-3 is their ceiling. What do you think they're actually going to finish at?
I'll bump them to 13-4.
Okay.
Say.
So yeah, we're kind of all in the same ballpark here. And Chris, so you had them winning one more game than I did. I can guarantee you I know what that game was, and that's because it's the Lions. I have the Lions beating the Rams. I have this feeling. Jared Goff revenge game. I think it's going to happen. But yeah, so that's really the only game we differed on. I'm almost guaranteeing. So I basically had them at 11-6 too. So, but yeah, really fun team. As we keep saying, they're going to be fun to watch, regardless whether they're good or bad. I know the Cowboys are going to be really fun on Hard Knocks, and I know the Rams. I think they were on Hard Knocks last year, but this would be another great team to have on Hard Knocks. A lot of different storylines there with this team. So we'll jump in now to another intriguing team who there was full of drama here down the stretch last season and then into the offseason with Russell Wilson. Seemed like he was bound to get traded sooner rather than later, and then all that stuff kind of just quieted randomly, even though they didn't really address their offensive line too much, and that was the big problem that Russell Wilson had, and with the coaching staff and everything. It just seemed, by all accounts, they just kind of handled it internally and patched the relationships, at least for now, and now things seem to be a little bit back on track, even though this potentially could still be Russell Wilson's final season in Seattle, which will be, again, another great storyline to watch in this division. But last year, they actually won the NFC West at 12-4. They were smoking cigars. They beat the Rams. They were super excited. And then they turned around and lost to the Rams in the playoffs. So it didn't end on a great note there for Seattle, but still overall a quality season. They were Russell Wilson was setting the world on fire. DK Metcalf was the best receiver in the NFL, many thought, for the first half of the year. And then the second half of the year, they just fell off a cliff. Their defense was bad throughout the season. So it is a little bit scary to think that this team, who had so much going wrong for them last year, still found a way to win the division. And they seem to have made some decent additions, at least in this offseason, that hopefully make them a better team even in 2021. But in terms of their additions, they had added Aldon Smith, Gerald Everett from the Rams that we just mentioned, Dwayne Eskridge. They got him in the second round of the draft. They also didn't have a first-round pick because of the Jamal Adams trade. I think they only had 3 picks total in the draft,
not much,
if I'm not mistaken. They also added Pierre Desir and Kerry Hyder. In terms of key subtractions, I guess you can count Carlos Hyde as a key subtraction at this point in his career. He went back to the Jaguars. I believe he was there a few years ago. Shaq Griffin, in my opinion, their biggest loss in the offseason. He also went to the Jaguars. David Moore went to the Panthers, was a decent receiver for them. And then Quinton Dunbar, who was another decent piece in their defense, went to the Lions. But I think, Chris, you started us off with the Rams. So, Roman, what is your analysis here of the Seahawks?
Yeah, so in terms of Seattle's additions and subtractions, personally, I think it's more of a lateral move. I don't think they got better or worse in the offseason. However, I think we all know that their lack of success in the second half of the season was all because of Russell Wilson. So if you believe that he'll have a more consistent season, which I kind of tend to believe he will, I think they'll be in a good spot once again this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they've never had a sub 500 record with Wilson, so you can only imagine that trend will continue. So I think they'll have a good year. I mean, not too bad, not too great, but I think they'll have a good season again.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lower on this team, I'd say. I think the Seahawks are closer to what they did in the second half than what they did in the first half, personally. They obviously have some talented players. You look at Russell Wilson, a very good quarterback, one of the better ones in the league that we got now. Chris Carson, a solid running back, and then their duo of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Their offense has some talent on it, but where they're really struggling is both on the defensive side of the ball. They got obviously a couple really good players, Jamal Adams, Bobby Wagner, but besides that, it's a bad defense, man. They are going to get shredded this year, in my opinion. I think they're going to be one of the worst defenses in the league. And then they don't have a very good offensive line either. So Russell Wilson's constantly under pressure. He's got to be pretty much perfect for them to win games, which he was not in the second half. And obviously he's a great quarterback. He's going to have some great games. He's going to carry them to some definite wins that we're not expecting. But I mean, when I say I'm talking pretty down on them, I still have them with a decent record that I won't share as of right now. But they're, I think if I was to put odds on, I think this is the least likely team to win the division. That's a good way to put it. I don't think they have a lot of upside, in my opinion. I think they have a good floor, like pretty much, maybe a higher floor than a team like the Cardinals, potentially, maybe even a team like the Rams or the Niners. But I really don't think their ceiling is anything. Maybe wild card exit would probably be maybe divisional round, but I don't really think they're going to make the playoffs. So we'll have to see. They're going to be close, but I mean, it's a team just with a lot of holes on it, and they're really relying on Russell Wilson to play at an MVP level again this year, which last year obviously started that way and finished really slowly. So, but they still finished 12-4 last year for the record. So maybe that's the recipe this year as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Chris. I think even though they might, like you said, even though they might not be as bad as potentially the Cardinals could be if things go wrong for the Cardinals. I definitely think the upside with the Cardinals, just because they're younger, I feel like they have more pieces. They made more additions this offseason. They definitely could go farther than the Seahawks thing. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think their upside is divisional round at best. I almost look at this team almost like Steelers light last season. Like the Steelers were 11-0. Everybody loved them, but everyone was kind of like there might be frauds, and then they just kind of fell apart down the stretch. Obviously, lost in the first round of the playoffs. And the same thing happened with the Seahawks last year. I mean, they were really good. Everyone was like, "Oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl." Then they really fell off down the second half of the stretch, even more than the Steelers did. Lost in the first round of the playoffs. And I think if you look at a lot of the predictions, and not to spoil our AFC North preview, but I also think the Steelers are not going to be that great of a team. They're not going to be awful. They're not going to be as good as they were last year. And I think the same thing is going to be true for the Seahawks this year. I think they're not, as my record shows, they're not going to be awful, but they're going to be in like that playoff conversation. But I definitely don't think they're the Super Bowl contenders that the Rams are, or the Niners are, that we'll get into here in a second. And it'll be really interesting to see if a 7 to 9 win season is enough to have Russell Wilson stay without some drastic changes in the offseason. So this could very well be the Russell Wilson's last season in Seattle. So it'll be really fun to see. I'm also really interested to see if DK Metcalf, and we kind of talked about this in our fantasy episode, if he's the guy that he was at the first half of last season, or if he's more so the guy that he was at the second half of the season where he was pretty inconsistent. And really, you could say the same thing about Tyler Lockett. He was awesome or he was non-existent. So, and Chris Carson too. I think he could have I think he could be the X factor. I don't think people are talking about him enough. All reports out of camp are that they're going to try and run the ball more than they did last year, because last year they kind of went to throw the ball more. Obviously, that didn't work. That worked out for a little bit, then it didn't work out anymore. I think if Carson can stay healthy, he could maybe bring an element to this team that they didn't really have last season. So there are some pieces here that I do kind of like, but it's definitely, in my opinion, the least intriguing team in this division. I think a lot of the other teams are just more intriguing. They're better. And I think if I had to bet, yeah, I mean, my record will show that they are, in my opinion, I think they're going to be the fourth place team in this division. With that being said, though, I do think, kind of like what we said with the Rams, if they were in like the NFC East or even the NFC North, I think they could possibly win that division. There's still some talent on this roster. But their defense, though, was just so bad last year. And they really, like Roman said, they really didn't do a whole lot to add that. They really just made up for what they lost in terms of Shaq and Dunbar. So, they're not going to be that fun of a team to watch, in my opinion. Well, I guess they could potentially put up a ton of points like they did last year.
Their offense,
but then they also said they weren't going to throw it as much. So who knows?
Yeah, I do agree with you that you're the least intriguing team to talk about, and you talk about teams like the Cardinals, the 49ers. They do have more upside. I do think they're more exciting to watch, and they have more intrigue and pull when it comes to this season. But like I mentioned earlier, I think Seattle will still have a good record. I personally think they'll make the playoffs. Kind of keeping consistent. I think Russell Wilson throughout his career has been consistent, except for the second half of last year. But I do think they will have to have a few breaks catch their way, or go their way. And I think Russell still has to perform at a high level, whether it's MVP type level, we'll see. Because he's shown that he can have that side to him. He's also shown he can be the complete opposite of that. So I do think some stuff has to go right for them, but I do think they could have another good year. Not division winning worthy, like I mentioned, I have the Rams winning this division, but I think Seattle can still compete with that.
Yeah, with this team, a couple extra points to add. We can get into the record prediction after that. The Seahawks, I really just don't think it's not that they're a bad team at all by any stretch of the imagination. I just think the other three teams made key additions to their team. You look at the Rams with Matthew Stafford, you look at the Niners getting Trey Lance, making some other moves as well, and you look at the Cardinals obviously going after J.J. Watt, adding a couple other defensive pieces, as well as building up more offensive weapons. They really obviously did a lot, which we'll talk about soon. But I really just think the Hawks are more running in place here. I don't really think they got a lot better. They were 12-4 to be fair last year, like we keep saying. I keep thinking they were worse than they were last year. They were still a really good team last year. And it is, while I also think they are going to finish fourth in the division, it's super hard to bet against Russell Wilson, man. I mean, this is a bet against the dude that's done it for a really long time that me and Drew are both. And it sounds like maybe he's a little bit higher than us, but it sounds like very similarly Roman agrees with us that they're not as good as some of the other teams in this division. So It is extremely hard to bet against one of the best quarterbacks, not just now, but I would say one of the better quarterbacks that we've ever seen, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I mean, I have them last, but I actually we'll get into records in a second, but I only have them 4 games back of my division winner, and 2 games back of, I guess I kind of gave my answer away, but 2 games back of a wild card spot. I think they're going to be right there in that wild card hunt, and I think it's important to note that even though we're not as high on them as the other teams in this division, and they might not be as intriguing as the other teams in this division, it's still, in the grand landscape of the NFL, an intriguing team to watch. It's just because this division, as we keep saying, is just so freaking insane this year. It's like I don't remember the last time we had a division where it's like all 4 teams are like really, really good. Maybe not really, really good, but like playoff contenders, and then also some Super Bowl contenders as well. I mean, it's pretty insane how good this division is. I just hope that it's not like a bloodbath, and like by the time they get to the playoffs, all these teams are just devastated and they're tired and they're exhausted, and then like the teams that maybe had the more easy roads to the playoffs, like maybe Tampa Bay, they kind of just steamroll them in the playoffs because they didn't have to go through that stuff. But we'll have to wait and see. But any other thoughts on the Seahawks before we get into our record predictions? Okay, so I kind of gave mine away already. So I have them going 8-9, which again is respectable. And I think, again, I keep saying it, but if they were in a different division, I think they could put up 10, 11, 12 wins. They just have a really tough schedule. So I actually only have them 2 games back of the Rams. So I still have some respect for Seattle. But overall, I think they're probably the last place team in this division, which is tough. And as I said before, it's going to be interesting to see if they do end up last place, what it does for Russell Wilson's future in Seattle. But how about Chris? You go next here with your record prediction.
Yeah, see, I kind of chuckled a little bit because I also had the Seahawks at 8-9, but I couldn't do that to Russell Wilson, man. Especially after I heard, Roman. I think you're right on this, that I'm not 100% sure. I'm not going to vent it right now, but I don't think he's ever had a losing season there. So I give him the 9-8 nod. I still think that's a respecting everybody in this division being over the 500 plateau, because I think this division is elite. I mean, these teams are all, like you said, any one of these teams would be one of the better teams in almost every other division. Personally, I think these are probably all top 14 teams-ish. I mean, I think the Hawks definitely are a playoff team. You just got to play 6 games against these other 3 teams. It's going to be tough for them to get to that plateau of making the playoffs. But 9-8, I gave them the nod there. Drew, obviously, you're just a total hater to the Seahawks, and I love them. But no, it's just the over 500 nod for them, for the Seahawks, and just missing out on the playoffs.
Yeah, I could definitely see, like, based off of everything you said, it's hard to look at this and say, oh yeah, they can do exactly the same thing. However, I still have some hope. Like I mentioned, I'm not like I'm not a Seahawks fan or anything, but I do think they can have that sense of replication this year. I'm going to go with 11-6. I don't think they're going to be exactly as good as last year, but I do think they can, reach that point a little bit. And like I mentioned, make the playoffs. They're my second place team in the division.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think they can do it again.
Yeah, wow. So you're actually a little bit higher than both me and Chris
yeah.
on the Seattle then, and I'm
And
curious to see what
like
your
Chris said,
records are for the next 2 teams.
And like
because
Chris
we
said,
haven't gotten to my first place team yet, and they're not. They're probably your 3rd place team, or maybe your 4th place team.
And like Chris said, it's hard to look at Russell Wilson and say, oh yeah, he's going to go under 500.
Yeah.
You just can't fathom that. So that's not the only reason I said they're going to go above 500, but I think they can, do the same thing they did last year, run the ball more like they said they're going to. And like I mentioned earlier, they have to have a few things go their way in order to have that record, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And yeah, maybe I'm not putting enough respect on Russell Wilson, his name, by only giving them 8 wins. But I was kind of thinking about this while you guys were talking about your records. I do think that the 4 teams in this division would win the division in both the NFC East and the NFC North pretty, I think, easily. I think all 4 of these teams are probably better than the Packers, I would say, at least as of right now with the Aaron Rodgers uncertainty. If Aaron Rodgers does play and he's 100% committed, then maybe not. But it's interesting to kind of see how deep this division is. But we'll hop in now to the next team, the San Francisco 49ers. So this record, I know they were 6-10 last year. They missed the playoffs, but it is a little bit misconstruing because they, of course, I think it was the Jets game or the Giants game, and they lost like all of their players. Basically, they lost Nick Bosa, they lost Elton Thomas, they lost everybody, and obviously they lost Elton Thomas too in free agency this year. But they were devastated by injuries. Jimmy Garoppolo missed much of the season. They were rolling guys with like C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins for much of the year at quarterback, and it was pretty gross. But then some of their guys started coming back there down the stretch. They played spoiler. They won some games. George Kittle was out for like half the season. He came back and was his usual dominant self. And then they had a relatively, I think, good offseason. They did lose some key pieces. Like I mentioned, Solomon Thomas went to the Raiders. Kendrick Bourne was kind of a decent receiver for them last year to the Patriots. They lost Kerry Hyder to the Seahawks. Tevin Coleman to the Jets, too. He's kind of a shell of himself. Jerick McKinnon to the Chiefs, who it seems like Jerick McKinnon is always like he's the hype train. Everyone wants to talk about him in August, then he gets hurt in week 2, and you never hear from him again. And that's kind of what happens. It seems like every season with him. And then also Richard Sherman, which we don't have to get into detail of his situation, but he will not be coming back to San Francisco this year, most likely. But they had some key additions too. They got Trey Lance. They traded up to the 3rd overall pick, drafted Trey Lance. They drafted Trey Sermon at running back. I really, really like that pick in the 3rd round. They bolstered their offensive line with Alex Mack, He's actually kind of a Kyle Shanahan follower. I believe he was with the Falcons and possibly Washington too when Kyle Shanahan was there. And he really, really bolsters. He's a solid offensive lineman, solid center. They really bolsters that offensive line, in my opinion. They got Samson Ebukam from the Rams, Wayne Gallman Jr., Arden Key, and then also Mo Hurst. So a decent offseason. And as I mentioned too, we don't have it listed here. They do get Nick Bosa back most likely, as long as everything goes right with his injury recovery. George Kittle will hopefully be back for the full season. Deebo Samuel too, which he always has injury issues, but hopefully he can stay healthy. Brandon Ayuk as well. He was banged up a little bit. So they're getting a lot of guys back that were already on their team last year back from injury, along with all these key additions. I think this is going to be a really, really good team. And Chris, I'll let you start off discussing the 49ers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, Drew, but this is my division winner right here, man. I am all in on the San Francisco 49ers this year. I think this team is going to be incredible this year. I mean, you look at this team was absolutely ravaged by injuries. I mean, you look at Nick Bosa last year. I mean, Jimmy G, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. I mean, the list goes on and on. This team was absolutely devastated by injuries last year. That's not going to happen again this year. You know, obviously there could be some injuries, but it's not going to be as bad as it was last year. I mean, every single running back this team had ever sniffed a 49ers jersey got hurt last year. Probably it felt like 30 running backs got hurt on this team last year. But, you know, they made – and obviously the key addition is trading, you know, a lot of future picks, a lot of draft capital to get Trey Lance, who I believe is going to be an absolute superstar. I love Trey Lance. I think he's super talented. I don't think there's a chance he busts because this team is so good around him that he doesn't even really need a bust for him would still probably be a pretty average quarterback in the NFL, in my opinion. But I think he has the upside, even in his rookie year, because I think he's going to play a lot this year, in my opinion. He could even honestly start week 1. I know they're, you know, smoke screen. Jimmy G's our guy. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, that's not true. This guy's going to start very early on in the season, in my opinion. I think they, you know, at the latest make the change at the bye week probably, but I could see it even being week 1. I just really think Trey Lance, you know, his athleticism, he has a cannon arm. He's got solid accuracy. Maybe needs to work on a little bit with that, but he's a very good. I mean, he didn't throw a single interception his season at North Dakota State. So that's really incredible in my opinion. I just think he's got plenty of weapons. You know, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, also Brandon Ayuk, Trey Sermon, a great offensive line, a defense, you know, that has a couple holes in it now. You know, Sherman leaving, a couple other, you know, Solomon Thomas is a pretty good player as well. So they do have a couple holes in the defense, but I still think it's an overall solid defense. And then just, you know, I'm all in on this team, man. I think it's another team with Super Bowl aspirations as well. And I think they're definitely one of the best teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I'm high on the 49ers too. And although like I mentioned, this is my third place team in the division, I'm still high on all these teams. So I think, you know, with one flip of the switch, this team is going to go to above 500 record. I think they could have a shot at the playoffs. And, you know, obviously you both have them as your division winners. I think it's certainly possible they make it back. To me, though, I think it's just the right time. All that matters is the transition between Garoppolo and Lance. I think if it happens early enough, then you might see that team, you know, skyrocket in potential. If it's towards the middle or late in the season, it might not be able to happen as much. I think that's going to be very important to focus on whenever the season gets rolling around of when they make that transition. And Trey Sermon, I know that he had a huge opportunity to fall into his lap with some of the injuries and departures of that backfield. So if he can step into that role, I know with Shanahan's running back core, I mean, he likes to rotate them quite often, but if Sermon can make the most of his opportunities, and if Lance, you know, shines when he's put in, I think this team can do much better than I expect them to. But I do expect them to flip the switch with all the defense pieces coming back, having their offensive weapons come back. I do think they'll be much better this year. I feel like they're not going to be nearly the same team as they were last year.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys keep talking about Trey Lance, but I mean, even if Jimmy Garoppolo starts, I still
be good.
I still think this is going to be a really good team, and I still think they will probably win the division even if Jimmy G starts the whole year. Especially just because, I mean, Kyle Shanahan is just really just demoralize this man in every media forum that he possibly can. I mean, I think he was on a podcast with Sean McVay a little bit ago talking about how he wanted Matthew Stafford and he was really bummed out and it was like a really dark day in his life when they missed out on Stafford. And then obviously they trade up and they get Trey Lance, which really shows that you really don't trust the guy at quarterback that you already have. I know they keep talking about, oh, we just want a solid backup. We want a solid backup. But If you're Jimmy G, I mean, this is the team that you were the guy a few years ago. They gave you a huge contract, and now they're kind of just pushing you to the side. I mean, I'm a sucker for like the revenge underdog like story, so maybe I'm kind of just biased towards that. But there's a roadmap here where Jimmy G just goes off and has maybe not an MVP season, of course, but has a solid season, and is able to get. I mean, he led them. He was pretty decent there. 2 years ago when they led him to when he led them to the Super Bowl, and yes, he did not connect with Emmanuel Sanders there on that potentially game-winning touchdown there late in the fourth quarter, but he still was pretty solid and got them to that point. And also, even if Trey Sermon isn't the answer at running back, they also have Raheem Mostert coming back too, who was pretty solid last year before he went down with an injury. As Chris said, every running back on San Francisco went down with an injury last season. But I also wanted to mention too, in addition to all their additions and their injury recoveries and everything, they have a fourth place schedule too, which also kind of played into my analysis of giving them having them win the division, because they're playing Cincinnati, they play Atlanta. They also play. There's another crap team on here that I saw. I think they play they play the Eagles. So teams that aren't great, and yeah, they do have to play the tough teams in the division twice, which is hard. But then they also get like the easy teams that each team plays as well, like the Texans and the Jaguars that the whole division is playing as well. So that did kind of factor a little bit, because they do have a fourth place schedule, even though, as we keep saying, they were only a fourth place team last year because of all the injuries. And once they got a couple of their guys back down the stretch, they were a decent team. And some people were like, oh, maybe the Niners can sneak into the playoffs here. Who knows? But yeah, the big question mark for this team is going to be who's that quarterback, because like Trey Lance isn't like hasn't have the cleanest bill of health either, and he hasn't played in a long time either. And also, kind of leading into my second point, another big question is going to be, can these guys stay healthy? I mean, it seems like every year this team, the one year they were all able to kind of stay relatively healthy, they made the Super Bowl. So if they can stay healthy, I think this is definitely a championship team. But I know we talk about the Rams, how that was a question mark for them. Can they stay healthy? But it's even a bigger question for the Niners. Can this team stay healthy? So, but I think if they can, I think this is definitely might be my Super Bowl favorite. Who knows? I think definitely my NFC favorite, at least for me. I think I really, really like this team. Of course, barring hopefully they stay healthy, because they're a really fun team to watch when they don't get hurt. But just hopefully they don't. Hopefully Jimmy G has a good year. I know you guys are all hype about Trey Lance, but I'm hoping Jimmy G has a good year and proves the doubters wrong.
And they'll be able to make a big statement week one, as Chris likes to keep mentioning in our fantasy drafts. I mean, they played Lions week one, so they'll be able to come out with a big performance if they want to.
That's why I want to see Trey Lance week one, man. It is. I'm sorry. It's just, Trey Lance. It's a perfect game to get him. Just screw Jimmy G. We don't need him. He doesn't give them the upside. In my opinion, I don't think he gives them the upside of a Super Bowl win. I think Trey Lance absolutely does, even his rookie year. I'm honestly obsessed with Trey Lance. Similarly to Justin Fields, I like both these guys a ton. I think, obviously Trevor Lawrence was the clear 101, but I think these two honestly have greater upside, in my opinion. I think they're both pretty similar, him and Fields. So I think Lance, this is just the absolute perfect destination. I just don't see how he's not good, at least decent this year with the weapons they have, a great offensive line, a great defense, a great running game, being able to be mobile, which is something Jimmy G absolutely does not have. And I just think he's going to run this offense to perfection. I think Kyle Shanahan's offense really – similarly, I think it is kind of similar to Sean McVay's offense with the Rams, but I think Trey Lance is that perfect mold to, run that, play action, maybe some read options they'll mix in there, I think, with him in town now. I just think it's such a perfect fit, in my opinion. I keep saying that, perfect fit. It just is, and I think it will be this year, and I think this team, like Drew says, is one of my favorites to honestly win the Super Bowl. I think they could absolutely get back there. Kind of depends on it, if the Chiefs come in healthy like they didn't last year, but if they're healthy, they'll probably win it all again. But if not, I think that the Niners are among that group of teams that definitely could get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have too much to add there. I think when you're talking Super Bowl contenders, I think you got to put the Niners, the Rams, the Chiefs, and then the Buccaneers. I couldn't think of, for some reason, I forgot about the Buccaneers there for a second. But I think those are, in my opinion at least, and we'll of course dive into these more as we go by division, but those are the four bona fide, clear-cut Super Bowl contenders going into this season. And yeah, the Niners quarterback battle was probably going to be the best in football, and maybe second to only another team that you mentioned there briefly, Chris, the Bears with Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. I mean, those are going to be probably the best quarterback battles that we'll see all season. But maybe Kellen Mond and Kirk Cousins too in Minnesota. That's another sneaky, sexy one. But yeah, if no one else anything else to add about San Francisco, I'll just mention my record prediction. So I do have them winning the division, as I said a couple times already. I have them going 12-5. So 2 games better than the Rams. A lot of that though is dependent on the fact that they play in their non-division games are a lot easier than the Rams non-division games because they technically were a last place team. But yeah, I think both teams are really good. And those Niners, really any game, any in-division game in this division is going to be must-watch TV, but especially those Niner-Ram games are going to be really awesome to watch. But Chris, I'll let you do your division or your record prediction for the Niners.
Yeah, for the Niners, I mean, there's always a team that goes from worst to first pretty much every single season in the NFL. There always seems to be a team that finds a way to do it. The Niners are the clear pick as this team, and they're my clear pick to win this. Well, not clear pick to win this division. My pick to win this division at 12-5 as well, similarly to Drew. And it definitely has a little bit to do with the schedule, but it also has to do with I think they're the best team in this division, and I think they will be. So, I'm really rooting for Niners are going to be one of my favorite teams to watch. I think they're going to be very fun to watch, and they're going to be a team I'm definitely cheering for.
Yeah, and I have them at 10-7, which seems disrespectful after what we've talked about so far. But I think 10-7 is a very respectable record. And like you mentioned, I think they'll be very slept on this season. Chris, you mentioned worst to first. They did it before.
I was about to say that.
They can do it again. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do.
Yeah, and 10-7, I think that's very respectable. I think you and I kind of we swapped the Rams and the Niners basically, because I think I had the Rams 10-7, and you're a little bit higher on the Seahawks, which kind of screws up the standings a little bit. But yeah, I was actually just about to say 2 years ago they went in 18 they were bad, and then 19 they went worst to first, and then they were bad last year. So maybe it's just like the Giants back in the day with the MLB, they were the even year championships. Maybe the Niners are the odd year championships. Now that we're in 21, maybe they'll be good again. But yeah, really great team. And we had another really intriguing team here with the Arizona Cardinals to finish it up here with this divisional breakdown. They were 8-8 last year. They were lighting the world. It's kind of like the Seahawks. They were like they were like the fun team. Everybody was like the dark horse. Everyone was really hype about them. I'm on record of calling them the Fraudinals several times in our group chats. I believe I said it in our podcast, and I was kind of proved a little bit right there because after the Hail Murray that everybody was going off about, I think they were 2-5 after that play. Unfortunately, missed the playoffs to the Bears. They really fell apart there down the stretch. I think the big loss that really cost them, I think, was the loss to the Niners, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was week 15 or week 16. So overall, a pretty good year compared to where we were kind of predicting them a year ago last summer. Finished 8-8, but from where they were at to start the season, it is pretty disappointing that they wound up missing the playoffs. It's very much a make or break year this year for Cliff Kingsbury, and even to an extent, Kyler Murray. I mean, we're probably going to talk about it here. There's some height concerns with him. Is he tall enough to be a good quarterback? Who knows? There's some stuff there. Why is his helmet so big? A lot of question marks with Kyler Murray. But their key additions here were J.J. Watt, one of the biggest additions of the offseason, I would say. Even though he's not the same J.J. Watt that he was a decade ago, he's still a really good player as long as he can stay healthy. They drafted Zaven Collins in the first round and Rondale Moore in the second round. I really like both those picks. They got the corpse of A.J. Green at wide receiver. I don't know how much he has left in the tank. He was pretty crap last year for the Bengals, but we'll have to see if maybe he's better as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. Malcolm Butler, 2, he's older. He's not as good as he was a couple years ago in New England, but he's still a really solid cornerback. And then James Conner, when he's on the field, he's decent, but he gets hurt all the time. Key subtractions, they lost Patrick Peterson to the Vikings, Arizona legend. That's a tough loss. They also lost Hassan Reddick to the Panthers, Kenyon Drake to the Raiders, and Dan Arnold to the Panthers. So, Chris, since you are the Cardinals fan, I know you started off the last team, so I apologize, everyone, but you are the Cardinals fan, so I think it's only right that we let you start off this analysis of the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, the Arizona Cardinals, Drew was definitely proven right last year by calling them the Fraudinals, which, it's pretty funny looking back on them. But, they definitely made a lot of big additions, in my opinion. I think adding J.J. Watt is huge. James Conner is a decent, return a lot of the rest, I'd say a lot of the rest of their moves were more like, replacing something they lost, I guess.
Yeah,
Patrick Peterson, not the same corner. Like, you see that big name, he's not the same player he used to be. Malcolm Butler, probably not really a big downgrade, honestly. They're probably pretty
I agree.
close to me. They add, they lose Hassan Reddick, which that's the big loss for them. Hassan Reddick was awesome last year, but Zaven Collins, I do really like. I think he's going to be really good, and that's a good replacement. And then, you lose Kenyon Drake to the Raiders. You bring in James Conner. Similarly, probably, mediocre running back. It's really not a big difference. So I think they do, they make these, replacements. They add a Rondell Moore, who I really like. AJ Green, which similarly you said probably washed, but it's at least a veteran, a veteran guy in that locker room and in that wide receiver room. And then also the big key addition is getting JJ Watt, who will, in my opinion, transform this defense. And then another thing is too, they're going to be getting back Chandler Jones this year as well. That's a huge addition. I mean, that probably should have been in the additions because he was out all of last season pretty much. This is one of the best pass rushers in the league, and that duo of Watt and Jones, it could be one of the best. I mean, he's more of a linebacker, Jones is, but they're both, pass rushers. That pass rushing duo is going to be fearsome. I mean, this is going to, in my opinion, totally transform their defense, it's not a very good defense altogether, but they do have some talent on the back end with like a Buda Baker. They got some other picks in that secondary, and then obviously adding Zaven Collins is a talented guy. But that defensive line, I mean, if you have a good pass rush, you can totally transform your defense with one player, and that's what J.J. Watt's going to do. If he can stay healthy, he's going to make this defense a lot better. And then it doesn't even really get into the offense yet. They just continue to, I mean, their offensive line is probably the weakest part of this team. It's still not great. It's okay, and Kyler Murray makes up a lot for that too because he's super mobile, one of the most athletic quarterbacks, in the league. So he definitely, makes it look better than it is, but it's still not great. But other than that, the wide receiver weapons are plentiful on this team. I mean, they have DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, who's awesome. Rondell Moore now coming in he's a burner, and this is probably what Andy Isabella was supposed to be for this team, is what Rondell Moore will be. I don't know how, for fantasy, no idea if he's actually going to be any good for fantasy, but I really like him to make this offense better. And then, like I said, AJ Green, decent, Christian Kirk, whatever, Larry Fitzgerald, good veteran leadership. But it's a very strong wide receiver room, and Kyler Murray has plenty of weapons at his disposal that he can work with.
So yeah, JJ Watt is definitely the main key factor this season. He'll obviously be the reason that they can tilt the needle from an even record to maybe a division contender. I know we've kind of reiterated this quite a bit, but we do think really all the teams can have a chance of winning the division. I believe maybe you guys don't think with the Seahawks, but I do think any one of these teams can win the division. However, if somehow JJ Watt did not live up to the season that we expect him to have, I do think it's possible for the Cardinals to kind of filter out and have another wasted season. I think Kyler Murray and their other team and the weapons showed some promise last year. So I think they can definitely have that optimism going into this year. However, if they don't have a good season, I don't think that's completely indicative on the roster. I do think if they do fall short, it'd probably be most likely be on the coaching. Like you said, Drew, it's a huge year for Cliff Kingsbury and coaches. So I do think it's possible that they could, have a good season, finally get over the hump and make the playoffs. But I do think it's kind of more likely they don't even make the playoffs. And that pains me to say, because even last year I was kind of on the odd man out saying, oh, I don't think they'll be as good. I know, Chris, you were hyping them up last year. Drew, you were kind of on the fence, I believe, or you just hated them altogether. But this year, I feel bad for not thinking they'll be as good when I do think they have the pieces to put it together. So I do think it's very well possible, but I think it's kind of more likely that they'll kind of have another even season.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the potential is there for them to be good. As you'll see, my record prediction, I anticipate them, kind of like what you said, I anticipate them having a very similar season to how they did last year. But like Chris, you were saying, if J.J. Watt really can stay healthy and really transforms their defense, but maybe doesn't make them as good as the Niners defense or the Seahawks defense, but at least puts them in that conversation where you're kind of like, okay, they're still really good. I think I love their offense this year more than I loved it last year. I think their running back room, weirdly enough, I think getting rid of Kenyon Drake and having James Conner there and being able to have Chase Edmonds by all reports is going to be the number one guy. I think that improves their running back room quite a bit because Kenyon Drake, he was just taking touches away from Edmonds. He was not no offense to Raiders fans, but I don't think he was that good of a player. Maybe I'm just blinded because I had him in fantasy and he sucked. But I don't know. I think he had that one good year in Miami, and I don't think he's that good. I think James Conner, I think this could be the perfect role for him. He's more of a change of pace back. He's the backup. He's not the main guy. He's not coming. He's not the heir to Le'Veon Bell like he was in Pittsburgh. He just be a guy that goes out there and plays football. I think that could really help them out. And obviously, also the Rondale Moore addition, even the AJ Green. I know I was dogging him a second ago, but AJ Green and Larry Fitzgerald combined at this point of their career as your wide receiver 3, that's pretty good.
Well, first of all, we don't even know if Fitzgerald's coming back,
that's
but that's
too,
also a good point too.
Yeah. And then you also got Christian Kirk, who I think is a decent receiver. And then obviously you got the big guys, DeAndre Hopkins, and as already mentioned, Rondale Moore. So I think their offense is going to be really good. They might need to get a little more on their offensive line, like you were saying, Chris, to make it like an elite level offense. But I think running, passing, I think they could have a really nice season offensively. It's really going to come down to that defense. Can they stay healthy? Can they be good? And unfortunately, they're just in a really tough division. And as I'm going to show in my record, I don't think they're going to make the play. I think they're going to be really, really close. They're going to be almost like they were last year, but I think they might just miss out, or they might sneak in as that 7th seed, which I think is very possible. So they're gonna be a fun team to watch regardless because that offense is so good. But I did want to say real quick though, because as we're kind of talking about each of these teams, they all have injury concerns, really, except the Seahawks. And I think that's the way the Seahawks could win this division, even though they might not have the most talent on paper. It might just be a war of attrition. They stay healthy, and then they find themselves in the playoffs. Because that's kind of what happened last year. So
yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah, so I really think each of these teams has a chance. The Cardinals, I do have them as my 3rd place team, but there's room for growth there if their defense can really come around because I really, really love their offense.
Yeah, me and Drew, honestly, this didn't happen really at all last year, I didn't think, but this has been, we have been basically totally in lockstep throughout this whole division because I have the Cardinals also as my 3rd place team, where I do disagree with you a little bit. I do think they're going to make the playoff. That's my prediction. You said you think they might miss / be the 7th seed. I think they're going to be a wild card team. I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs because I think the defense takes a step forward. And like you said, I absolutely love this offense. I love their receiving weapons. I love Kyler Murray. I think he's a great quarterback. I think he's going to take another step this year with his growth. I think there was definitely, despite his stats being really good last year, I think there was some times where it felt like he was, a little bit more passive on the field, not taking those aggressive shots. But I also think it had a little bit to do with that shoulder injury he had later in the season. I think, the downfield shots, it was, around that, Hail Murray game, I felt like after that I think that was around when the shoulder injury happened. I think it was maybe the next week possibly. I know it was against the Seahawks is when it happened, but it was later in the season. It felt like they as a team struggled when he struggled a little bit more down that stretch, but I think it was almost totally due to the shoulder in my opinion. So I think he comes in healthy. They come in healthy. Obviously, like you said, the injury concerns, there is some on all 3 of those other teams besides the Seahawks, at least in the past. So we'll have to hope they stay healthy for our prediction to be right. But I think this is also going to be the 3rd place team in the division with plenty of upside to win the division as well. If Kyler takes the next step, if this defense with J.J. Watt is improved, they can absolutely win this division.
Yeah, I quickly kind of, while you were talking, I was going through the other NFC divisions to see if there was another team that I could see that, or 2 other teams that could knock them out of a playoff spot because I already have the Rams there, and I don't think there is. So I think we are in agreement, Chris. I think they are going to make the playoffs as the 6th or 7th seed in a wild card spot. And if they don't, kind of like you were saying, Roman, and I think I mentioned briefly earlier, I don't think they're going to blow it up, but I do think Kingsbury will get fired. Because if you look at the general manager, the front office, I think they've put a good roster together, especially where they were just a couple of years ago with the 1st overall pick. And then before that, they wasted a top 10 pick on Josh Rosen. So the front office, I think, has done a decent job at really building this roster up. But Kingsbury is supposed to be the next best thing since Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, and he really hasn't lived up to that billing so far. So this is really a make or break year for him. But we can jump in now to record predictions. Since I stole Roman, you were supposed to start the Cardinals off, and I stole that. I gave that to Chris. I'll let you start off here with your record prediction here for the Arizona Cardinals.
So yeah, like I mentioned, I think the Cardinals will fall in last place, which pains me to say it because I do think the Cardinals are going to be a fun team to watch, and I mentioned it earlier. I do think they'll be more exciting to watch than a team like the Seahawks, but I do think they're going to fall in last place. Just gotta miss the playoffs that they did last year. I think they'll tilt the wire between 9-8 or 8-9, And I don't want to get into the Packers too much, but I do think that whoever happens with Rodgers, that can really tilt the needle with all these teams, because they do play the NFC North this year. So if they have Rodgers or they don't have Rodgers, I think that can make the difference. And that could be a good enough reason why some of these teams would win as opposed to losing if they had a Rodgers-led Packers team. But I do think they'll tilt the needle, like I mentioned, between 9-8, 8-9. Either way, I think they're going to miss the playoffs just barely.
I mean, that's fair. I definitely think, like me and Drew were kind of talking about earlier on, I think this Cardinals team probably has the lowest floor out of any team in this division.
Yeah,
I could see them being a 6-10 team for sure, or 7-10. That's where I'll go with the floor, because I forgot it's 17-game schedule. But yeah, I think that's possible. It's definitely within the realm of possibilities. If Watt gets injured, if Kyler doesn't take that next step, it absolutely could happen in this tough division. But I think their ceiling could be 12-5, maybe even 13-4 potentially if everything really breaks right. But I have them right in the middle at 10-7. I think that's the sweet spot. 9-8, 10-7. But I'll give them the bump because I think they are going to make the playoffs. And it's a team that I very much like, has been on record. One of my favorite teams, honestly, probably my second favorite team. But the Lions, are they actually an NFL football team? I don't know. So
now they are.
Now, I don't know about that. But for this year, they're probably my favorite team because I'm going to be rooting against the Lions to get that early draft pick. So they're probably my favorite team in terms of rooting interests this year.
Yeah, and I'm kind of right there in lockstep with really both of you guys. I have them at 9-8, but I do have them making the playoffs, as I said before, as a 6 or 7 seed. As I said before, it just really sucks that they're in this division, because I do think they have the lowest floor, and it's very possible that they just can't beat any of the teams in this division, and they have a really brutal record. And unfortunately, if they were in another division, they'd probably win it pretty easily because they have a lot of talent on this roster. So they're going to be a fun team to watch, though, regardless. With all the intrigue and the drama. So, but Roman, you have one more thing here about the Cardinals.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with Chris when he said 7-10 is the floor. That's kind of where I had my projection originally. But like you mentioned, you kind of convinced me that if some things go their way, if J.J. Watt has a healthy season, they could be much better than that. But I agree with Chris in saying that 7-10 could be the basement for them.
Yeah, I could even see them going like 6-11, maybe 5-12. Are we crazy? If they can't beat any team in this division, if all the teams, everything goes right for the Seahawks, Rams, and the Niners, and everything goes wrong for the Cardinals, they could be bad. But you can say that about any team.
Yeah. Really.
But yeah, they're going to be fun to watch. I really think that. So now, as we wrap the episode up, let's briefly go over our standings, and then we can jump into our fantasy picks for the division as a whole. This should be pretty rapid fire, pretty quick. We already kind of talked about it throughout the episode. But for me, I had the Niners 12-5. Rams 10-7, Cardinals 9-8, and then I had the Seahawks at 8-9. Chris, I think yours are pretty similar to mine, so why don't you go next?
Yeah, I got the Niners at 12-5, Rams 11-6, Cardinals 10-7, and Seahawks 9-8.
And I have Rams 13-4, Seahawks 12-5, 49ers 10-7, and Cardinals 8-9.
Yeah, so even though our standings were maybe a little bit different, we all kind of had them each in the same ballpark in terms of record and who was winning. But now we'll do something that I'm really excited to do because we kind of shaking it up a little bit from compared to what we did last year. So we each have a fantasy favorite and a fantasy sleeper pick or for the division as a whole. So we're not going to go team by team. We're just going to go with the division as a whole. We each have 2 players that fit each of those categories. I will let Roman start us off here with the favorite picks, and we'll go Chris, then me, and we'll just do it snake order. So Chris, you'll have the second pick both times. But Roman, start us off here with who's your favorite fantasy player in this division?
Sure. I'm going to have to go with Robert Woods, a wide receiver for the Rams. I think he's going to be the main beneficiary for the Stafford trade. And even after the Akers injury, I think you can definitely see a ramp up in his workload. Definitely a PPR going to be a good pick. I did have one honorable mention that I'll mention if you guys don't mention him, but Woods, definitely my favorite. I've been liking him for years now. I think, now with Stafford, I think he'll have a great year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that pick, Roman. I think Woods, it wasn't going to be mine, so I'm glad you took him. But Woods is a guy that you always can draft, in that 5th, 6th round area. I think that's right where his ADP is yet again this year. He's a PPR monster, and now he's got what I really like about him this year that is not been true for the last few years is now he has some upside, like more upside than wide receiver 10 because he has a new quarterback, and it's Matthew Stafford, a great quarterback. Him or the other receiver in town, Cooper Kupp, which if someone picked him, sorry, but either one of these guys has a chance to be a top 5 receiver in my opinion. I honestly, both of them could be if everything really, or top 10. I would say both could be definitely in the top 10. Maybe we're sleeping on both guys and Matthew Stafford here, in my opinion. It's Stafford, I think, comes in and just instantly gives a ton of upside to both weapons, and I really do like Robert Woods as a guy that I'm going to be definitely targeting in my draft, which is actually tonight, and it's very early. Me and Drew will be drafting tonight. Some scheduling conflicts and stuff, so got to take some guys can get you points when you're drafting this early. Robert Woods is definitely a guy that I have circled on my draft board.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add. I knew I was gonna pick him, but I know Roman, you're a big Bobby Trees fan, so I was like, I'm not gonna pick him. So I knew it. You didn't let me down. But Chris, who's your fantasy favorite of the division?
Yeah, I've got a lot of guys in this division that I very much like, but I'll go with similarly to Roman here. I'm going to go with a guy that feels a little underappreciated. This is at the running back position. It's Chris Carson for me. I think he's another guy that I really like. I think he has he just re-signed a contract, so they're committed to him. They've talked a lot about running the football even more than they already do, which is at one of the highest rates in the league. And Carson's going to be the guy that gets almost all of that work. He's a guy that he stays on the field in third down. He can catch the ball. He's very good between the tackles. He doesn't have that breakaway speed, but he does have a nose for the end zone as well. So he's a guy, that third, fourth round turn, I think is where his sweet spot is in drafts. I'd be very willing to take him early third. There's some running backs I would take over him there, but I think Chris Carson is a guy that is also absolutely disrespected every year. I feel like he finishes as the top 12 running back almost every single season, but yet again gets drafted, as the RB20. So a guy that I absolutely love and I really would like to draft this year, despite him not being the most exciting player in the world, kind of like Robert Woods. He's a guy that can absolutely not carry your fantasy team, but be a extremely high contributor throughout the entire season.
Yeah. Roman, you go ahead. I know you were excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, he was my other honorable mention, so I'm glad you brought him up. And it's very special to find a running back who can crack the top 10 without getting as much PPR work or receiving work, like Chris Carson. So I do think he'll be able to manage a workload where it'll definitely be ramped up if everything holds true, that they will give him more workload. And considering that they only have Rashad Penny, DJ Dallas in the backfield, you can only imagine that they'll probably trust Chris Carson a lot more. So I'm very excited for him, and I'll be actively targeting him in drafts if I can.
Yeah, the big worry with him is injuries, but as we've said throughout all of our mocks and our rankings and everything, injuries are a problem with every running back in terms of fantasy. But with Carson, first of all, I'm really happy because I have him as my RB2 in our Dynasty League, so that's great that you guys also are high on him. And I actually considered having him as my sleeper pick because I feel like nobody's talking about him, and he could be a really solid running back for your team.
You both were a little down on him last year, though.
I was, but I'm back in this year.
Yeah, I was down on him last year because the offense was moving towards more passing. His draft stock was a little bit higher than it is now, but now you can get him. You can get him as your RB2, RB3 in some circumstances, and I really love that. Yeah, potentially even your RB4. He is dropping. He's going around, guys. No offense, he's another guy who I have on my dynasty team, so I love the guy. But Myles Gaskin, he's going around where Myles Gaskin's going in some drafts. So it's like you got to put more respect in Chris Carson. I think we almost overcorrected, and now he's going way lower. And I really love that draft price where he's at right now. So I will go next. I'm happy because those are two guys that I both wanted to talk about. So I'm happy you guys both mentioned them. My favorite is a guy that actually Roman and Chris, you mentioned too when we were talking about Robert Woods. It is his new quarterback, and that is Matthew Stafford. I love him in fantasy. I've loved him in fantasy for a lot because he's one of those guys. If you do what we always like to talk about and wait on drafting your quarterback, you usually take Matthew Stafford. You can count on him for a lot. But right now, he's going I don't have the exact because it's based on different drafts, but he's going like QB 10 to QB 15, maybe a little bit higher, but he's going around guys like Ryan Tannehill, like Matt Ryan, like Kirk Cousins, in that kind of range, in that tier. Joe Burrow, as we talked about earlier before, he might not be a great guy to draft. Trevor Lawrence, even I've seen some drafts where Trevor Lawrence goes ahead of him. Even a guy like Tom Brady who goes ahead of him too, and there might be some concern if he with his age and if he stays healthy and everything like that. But with Stafford, I feel like he could be a really dynamic quarterback here with this new offense. He's got a lot of new weapons, like we already talked about. And you can draft a whole really awesome team, and then you can get Stafford there, is like the QB 10 to 12, and he could really be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy this year. I really, really believe that. So I love Stafford in fantasy this year. And I'm not being Detroit biased. If anything, I was against everybody that was crying about Stafford getting traded because that's what we wanted. So this is not Detroit bias. I like Stafford here as a fantasy prospect. I think he could be really good for your fantasy team, especially if you and you missed out on the top guys like Kyler or who's the other guy? I can't think. Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, all those top quarterbacks. He could be a really nice guy in that next tier of quarterbacks.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Drew. And it sounds like we're going to be, in a little bit of a pissing contest to see who, takes him first. Because I'm probably going to be right there with you, man. Because I also do like Matthew Stafford this year. He's not. If you take him, I'll be mad. But there's some other sleepers I like, so it's not. He honestly could be in either one of these. He could be a sleeper.
I did consider putting him as my sleeper,
but I also like him as that he's as your favorite because I think that's a bold proclamation, and I think it's absolutely could be true because I almost had him in my sleeper and favorite as well because I think he's going to be I think he's got a lot of upside for sure, and I'm very excited for it.
Stafford was actually in my sleeper group, so I'm glad you guys brought him up. While in real life people have caught up to him, the analysts want to put him in the top 10. All of a sudden, the fantasy community still want to draft him middle to late rounds.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, so I do think he's going a little later in drafts than you might expect for all the hype he's been getting in real life. So I do think he'll be one of those players that you can maybe an Aaron Rodgers from last year, you get him kind of ish late, maybe a little earlier than that. But he could win you he can win a fantasy league, I think, this year as opposed to where he couldn't do that years before.
Yeah, the one bad thing for Chris and I, though, and you too, Roman, when you do your draft later in a couple weeks, is we live in the Metro Detroit area, so Stafford always goes higher than he should go in most drafts. So he probably won't be there in that range because he's probably going to go high, especially because everyone's hype on him. But in most drafts, where you're drafting with reasonable people, not Lions fans, Stafford will hopefully be there later in the rounds, and it would be a really awesome pick. But I'll jump in. I'll start us off here with the sleeper picks. I'm sticking with the quarterbacks, and I am doing a deep, dark sleeper here because I thought about Stafford, I thought about Carson, but I was like, I don't want you guys to get mad at me if that's not a true sleeper. But Chris is upset. I know it's not Chris's guy because he just dogged this guy when we talked about the 49ers. I'm talking about Jimmy Garoppolo. This is a guy, he goes undrafted. If you do the really no quarterbacks until the absolute last second, and you load up on every other position, and you get Jimmy G here as your quarterback or even your backup quarterback, the potential is there, right? I know, Chris, you're going to talk about a different Niners quarterback most likely as your sleeper, and I also like that player. But I wanted to get a little off the board here for our first division breakdown and our first fantasy sleeper pick. That's why I like Jimmy G. You get him super light. If he stays healthy, he was semi-fantasy relevant 2 years ago in 2019. You could have some spot starts. He's not going to let you down. He's got more weapons. He's got potentially a better team than he did a couple years ago. And he's going to be, like I said, he's playing for his job. He's playing for his livelihood. He's fired up. Maybe you get that little extra juice. And if you really want a deep, dark sleeper quarterback, I think Jimmy G is your guy. Like I said before, he's going virtually undrafted right now. He's going after guys like Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, who you don't even know who's going to start there at quarterback. And same thing with Jimmy G too. You don't know if he's actually going to start. So there's some risks there. But I wanted a deep, dark, juicy sleeper. I wanted to get really deep cuts here. So Jimmy G is my sleeper pick.
I want to hop in there before you, Chris. Sorry to interrupt, but I definitely can see where you're coming from. If you're going to play this streaming game, similar to defenses, if you want to stream quarterbacks, why don't just take the shot on Jimmy G? Chris, at Detroit week 1, you could stream him week 1 if you know that he's going to play. If he goes undrafted, pick him up, start him week 1. I think that's definitely a win there. You still have to plan ahead, obviously, for the weeks after. But if you felt so inclined to, go quarterback late or even take one undrafted, I think Garoppolo could be a good option for week 1 at least. I'm not going to speak on the whole season, but week 1 definitely a good option.
And also, real quick, I know we're worried about like Kyler having to go against really good defense, but with Jimmy G, he's got one of the good defenses on his team. So he's going against the Seahawks defense twice a year. Not a great defense. Arizona could be a good defense, but we don't know. They got them twice a year, and then he's got the Rams twice a year, which is tough. But outside of that, pretty easy schedule for the Niners, as we already said. The big if is you don't even know if he's going to be the starter by week 1 against the Lions. But hey, if you're waiting that long to draft a quarterback, I think with the other options around Jimmy G's draft position, you take Jimmy G and be like, okay, he could win you a league. You never know. He could be an MVP. Probably not, but who knows?
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, well, I didn't. This is a sleepers section. I didn't know we were in eternal hibernation. I was not under that impression. But yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I don't agree with pretty much a lot of things that you say. And I'll bring it up in a second why. But I do agree with that. You could, if he does start, and you are just, I mean, if you just if you put a blindfold on for the quarterback position, you could probably start him in week 1, but I don't want to. I still don't want to at all. You know who I want to start in week 1 is Trey Lance. That is my sleeper quarterback, and I will absolutely be looking to draft him as my backup quarterback in tonight. I him or Justin Fields. That's why I don't mind giving it away right now. Him or Fields, I'm absolutely fine with drafting as my backup quarterback. I want the guy that's going to give me league-winning upside in the second half of the year. Yeah, maybe he doesn't start for 7 weeks. I don't care. I get a starting quarterback. I get a Jalen Hurts. I get a Ryan Tannehill. I get a Matthew Stafford. I get one of those late guys that I like, that I know can get me points right away, and I take one of these high upside rookie quarterbacks as a backup. Trey Lance, similar to reasons that you said about Jimmy G's schedule, Trey Lance with that schedule, with having one of the good defense, playing the freaking Seahawks, he can score 50 points in fantasy, in my opinion, against that defense. That defense is horrible, and this guy's he's an electric quarterback. I love Trey Lance for fantasy this season. Obviously, you don't want to take him as your only quarterback unless you know that he actually is the starter. Then I'm fine with it. I don't have a problem taking him or Fields if you know they're starting week 1. But I would like to take them plus another late-round quarterback, pair those two up. You can get the Matthew Stafford. Like I said, it's my perfect pairing will be taking Stafford really late, and then a couple rounds later taking Trey Lance as well, because you get the upside of Stafford, which is solid upside. He's going to get you solid fantasy points every week. He's also very safe with this offense, but has upside. And then in the second half of the year, you could have a Dak Prescott, a Kyler Murray, a Lamar Jackson in Trey Lance or Justin Fields. But in this obviously we're doing this division, so I'd take Trey Lance. I just think he's the perfect sleeper. And I think people are sleeping on him way too much. So it's been a guy that I have quickly I've been doing a lot of research on my late round quarterback. So that's why I'm talking about this for a lot, because I'm just very excited about Trey Lance. I think he's going to be awesome this year.
And to be honest, I think you might see even a lot of leagues, maybe more casual leagues, you might say, but I think there's actually a genuine possibility Trey Lance goes undrafted.
Won't any league I'm in.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna take him, Chris. But overall, I mean, if he's not drafted, you gotta smash that for sure. Pick him up instantly, because I don't think many people are gonna want to draft him if they're casuals, only just because they don't know if it'll start right away. And many people, like the Justin Herberts, the Joe Burrows, they don't. No one picks them up until they actually start performing well, as opposed to taking them before they go off. So I think it definitely could happen again.
Yeah. And actually, to defend myself a little bit, as I originally was going to pick the San Francisco quarterback position, and I was going to suggest, I knew, Chris, you were going to pick Trey Lance. I didn't want to steal two guys. I knew that's where you were going to go. But I was going to say San Francisco quarterback position. You could potentially, with your last two picks, take Jimmy G and Trey Lance, really lock down that San Francisco quarterback position. And then worst case scenario, you drop Jimmy G and you pick up Fitzmagic. You could pick up Drew Lock as your backup if Trey Lance does start. If Trey Lance doesn't start, then you got Jimmy G, who's a solid quarterback there for the first 7 weeks. Then once Jimmy G is done and pushed out the store, then you can switch him with Trey Lance and he can go off like Chris you're projecting. So
not a bad idea.
It's off the wall strategy for sure. But it could potentially work. You could be loaded at the other skill positions. Could have a decent defense. Could have a decent kicker, and then you just snag those two quarterbacks there late with your last two picks, and go and see what happens. I mean, I think that could
do that in our next mock draft.
Yeah, we could. I'll do it. I don't care. It's a mock
draft.
I'll
try Trey Lance, and then you forget about it because he's going to be awesome. Hopefully, he just starts week 1, and we don't have to worry about Jimmy G being potentially relevant in week 1. We can talk about how Trey Lance is going to be a top 3 quarterback in his first week in the NFL against the crappy Lions defense.
I will say it's a very Lions thing. I mean, we saw it with Sam Darnold, his debut, and he went off against the Lions. I mean, it's a very Lions thing for Trey Lance to start week 1 and absolutely go off, and everybody goes nuts about Trey Lance against the Lions. So that I can already see the ESPN headline in my head. That's how realistic it seems. But all right, so we already kind of talked about Chris's sleeper, my sleeper. Roman, who's your sleeper?
Yeah, so I guess I can clean up the rest because I have a few names I want to mention. I don't want to talk about the 49ers much anymore, but I have Debo and Trey Sermon also on my list. I think based
Yeah.
off their ADPs, you can definitely get some value in those later rounds. Debo even going after Brandon Ayuk, which maybe just is because of the injury scare from Debo last season, but I think Ayuk and Debo both have the same or have great potential, but Debo is going much later, and Sermon obviously. But I'm going to talk about some deep sleepers that only come about because of the Cam Akers injury, and that's what the potential of the rest of the Rams backfield could be. And it's not Henderson. Obviously, Henderson is going to be the RB1 as presumably, but you got to look beyond that. So I have Xavier Jones, who I recently just picked up in Dynasty. We can't obviously project who's going to be the RB2, RB3. They still have to wait it out. They said they aren't going to sign a veteran. However, I have some other names they could sign. So Xavier Jones, who's already on the roster, Jake Funk, who they just drafted. So either one of those guys could make some noise depending on who's, the name of the depth chart. So if you're in Dynasty, just pick up one of them right away if you can, and then just hold them for now. And don't wait until they actually get announced. But one name, a veteran name who I wanted to talk about, and it's going to sound really funny. It's an old reliable for me. You might think it's crap or not. But what about Adrian Peterson? What if the Rams signed Adrian Peterson? That'd be hilarious. I think he can do some damage in that backfield. He could even start in that backfield if he wanted to. So let's go. Sign Adrian Peterson, reunite him with Stafford, and I'll pick you as my fantasy player week 1. Let's go.
I love that pick, Roman. I actually think AP would be a pretty good fit for their backfield. But I do like this pick as a whole. If I was to project one of these two to be the backup behind Darrell Henderson, it would definitely be Xavier Jones. What's Jake Funk? I couldn't remember his name. He's coming off, I believe it's 2 ACL surgeries out of college of back-to-back years. Like I said, I just picked him because you said you picked up Xavier Jones. I also picked up Jake Funk as well. So I picked him up in case he, is relevant. But I would definitely put the odds on Xavier Jones to win that backup job. Henderson's got some injury history. He's also not someone that I consider, an absolute superstar. Xavier Jones could pull James Robinson or another, a Chris Carson, and just because he's a UDFA, he could absolutely come out and win the starting job for a year and be very fantasy relevant. But another thing I just want to add to this, I just mentioned him actually. The Rams should definitely be on the phone talking to the Jaguars about James Robinson right now. I absolutely think that is a perfect guy. They could go trade a mid-pick for, a third rounder, probably could get the deal done. They get James Robinson, and nobody has to worry about whoever these sleeper running backs are. Nobody has to worry about Darrell Henderson being awesome. We just get to focus on how James Robinson is going to be a top 10 running back this year in fantasy. And we also – it restores just the balance to James Robinson, and it puts some respect on his name. So Rams, if you're listening to this, Sean McVay and co, Matthew Stafford, get them on the phone, and let's get this done. Let's get James Robinson. Let's bring him home.
I actually love that. That makes so much sense. I didn't even think about that. That's awesome. That might be one of your best projected trades, Chris. That makes so much sense for both teams.
Yes.
No, that's never mind. I was going to do really crazy there for a second, but yeah, I really like that. Overall, I do like the pick too, Roman. I even honestly like yesterday when the news broke that Akers was hurt and done for the year. Everybody was talking about Todd Gurley. Adrian Peterson was a guy that came to my mind about potential backup.
One of the first guys that did for me.
Because it does seem like that he did have good chemistry with Stafford last year. This is a good opportunity for him to get a ring, even though clearly with his recent stops in Washington and Detroit, maybe rings don't matter that much to him. He just wants playing time. But then he could get both here in Los Angeles. He could get playing time and potentially a ring. So that makes a lot of sense. I did actually consider picking Darrell Henderson as my sleeper pick, but I felt like that was just kind of low-hanging fruit with the Akers news. I don't really think he's going to be a sleeper that much anymore. But did anybody else have anything else they wanted to add here before we get out of here for this episode?
No, this division, I'm assuming, this was a little bit of a longer video for us. I'm assuming, this is because this division's so awesome, and I think it's going to be, I think most of them will be a little shorter, but I'm definitely glad we did a nice deep dive on the West, and I really think there's a lot to like in this division with all 4 teams.
Yeah, I'm glad we started out with this division. Surely the most interesting. I think this year is going to be what I kind of expected last year to be. I thought all 4 teams would be on the same par last year. But the Cardinals were kind of iffy and the 49ers had injuries. But this year, I think they'll all be close to even as possible. And then we'll have a true bloodbath like you mentioned, Drew. If that hurts them in the playoffs, so be it. But I think it's going to be very entertaining to watch those division games battle it out.
Yeah, it should be definitely the best division. And like you said, Chris, so this might be a little bit longer of an episode, but our next ones with next divisions, I don't anticipate us spending that much time, especially not to give any disrespect to the AFC South. That's the first division that popped in my head. I don't think we're going to spend much time on the Jags or the Texans. So those other episodes might be a little bit shorter, but hopefully this episode I think definitely was worth the length because of how great and interesting all these teams are and all their fantasy relevant players. I mean, it was hard finding sleepers, I felt like, because there are so many fantasy relevant guys in this division. So, and then I eventually went with Jimmy G because he's a really deep sleeper. So, but yeah, that'll do it for this episode. Once again, we are the Zone Defense Podcast. We're, as you can tell, we're kicking off our division previews for the 2021 NFL season. So make sure you don't miss any of those. We'll also keep doing our fantasy football rankings, fantasy mock drafts, and we'll probably do some tier lists too for teams as we get closer to the start of the regular season. Chris and I will also big shout out to the Bucks. Congratulations on your NBA Finals championship last night. Chris and I will probably do another Zone Defense basketball hour, breaking down the Bucks championship, as well as maybe previewing the NBA draft, which will be next week. So make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and on Apple Podcasts. So you don't miss any of that awesome content. Be sure you smash that like button. Leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought about our team-by-team breakdowns, our records, our standing predictions, as well as our fantasy favorites and sleepers. Tell us what you liked. Tell us what you didn't like. We love reading those comments and responding to them as quickly as we can. But once again, thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
See ya.